This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But first, let's start the quick run through the markets here for you. So generally speaking, markets across the continent tracking all the trends we've seen in other markets, in Europe, in Asia, and right now in the United States as well, all mostly closing in the red. The Kenyan market essentially close to its 11-year lows, closing about 0.7% in the red today. We'll keep you updated on what's happening in the American markets in the course of the hour. For now, here's what's coming up tonight. Togo and Cameroon report new cases of the coronavirus. We'll visit the crash site 1 year after the tragedy of flight ET302. And an innovator in Nigeria takes virtual reality into the world of education. Right, and let's start the hour with the latest on the coronavirus epidemic, at least with respect to Africa. Cameroon and Togo are the latest countries to confirm that they do have cases of this easily spread pathogen. After first emerging in China late last year, the novel coronavirus is currently spreading to other parts of the world. To date, over 95,000 cases have been reported around the world. Of these, 42 are right here in Africa. North Africa is the worst hit region on the continent with 33 confirmed cases. In sub-Saharan Africa, Senegal has 4 cases. All of them are foreign nationals. South Africa and Nigeria have 1 case each. Now on to Uganda. The G77 summit, which is due to take place in Uganda in April, has now been cancelled. At this point in time, I should point out, Uganda has no reported case of COVID-19. Now, the summit was supposed to bring together at least 135 different member states from around the world. Here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria with that report.
Uganda's permanent secretary to the United Nations says the decision was reached after consulting with the G77 countries. In a tweet, the UN representative Adonia Ayebare said the postponement of the G77 summit that was due to take place in Kampala will not affect the pre-summit preparations. No specific dates have been fixed, but the statement reads that the meeting will take place at a later date. This was the third summit of the G77 group of countries. The first was held in Havana and the second took place in Doha. Several global summits have been rescheduled over fears of a possible spread of the coronavirus. The Global Health Conference that was due in March in Orlando was cancelled, and the India-EU conference scheduled for March has also been postponed. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
All right, then. So in Kenya, the government has banned all international conferences, at least for the next 30 days. The move is part of efforts to prevent the spread of COVID-19, even though the country doesn't have any cases at this point. A string of high-profile events right across the continent have been scrapped in the last 48 hours. This comes as organizers are wrestling with the need to minimize the risk of infection in crowded venues. One of the continent's major events, the Africa CEO Forum, was postponed earlier in the week. The business conference was due to take place in Cote d'Ivoire just next week. Now, the Africa CEO Forum wasn't the only conference to have been cancelled in the last 48 hours. The next Einstein Forum in Nairobi, the Great Lakes Investment Forum scheduled for the 18th of March in Kigali, those have also been postponed. So let's try and get a feel for how the travel and tourism sector is being affected by this. Agnes Moshoha is the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Travel Agents here in Kenya. She joins me in studio right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So walk us through the trends of what's happened from January into February, as we started to get more and more reports of the coronavirus outbreak. How have bookings been affected?
The month of January held pretty stably, but as we have transitioned into the month of February, we started realizing a decline, and this was attributed to the cancellation of flights between various hubs into the China. And we also realized that in total, the number of passenger bookings that we lost was actually 6% in total. And as we are now transitioning into the month of March, we are realizing on average a decline of about 12% to date.
So that's 12% year on year compared to this time last year?
Compared to the same time last year, yes.
Okay. So that being said, because China, looking at the traffic statistics from 2018, China accounted for a fraction of tourism traffic because our main source markets are in the West. It's the United States, the UK, Germany, and so on and so forth. Now that we're seeing more cases coming from there, how much worse will it get?
It is a very unprecedented time, and we are still studying the data, and we are closely monitoring the cancellations that are taking place. You will realize that tourism is 100% anchored on aviation. So the minute a connectivity is withdrawn, we end up suffering directly. So what we're anticipating is that the virus is going to be contained in the markets that have been affected, and that we should be able to resume online operations without any further disruptions. And once that happens, immediately we'll begin to realize a recovery in the tourism sector.
But this first part of the year is usually your prime market, isn't it? Your prime marketing season.
This is usually the shoulder season.
Yeah.
The peak seasons begins to set in towards the end of June all the way to mid-September. Yes.
All right. So moving forward, though, I mean, this is it's a public health emergency issue, right?
Yes.
So when it comes to how you deal with cancellations and of course the question of refunds, because that always comes up.
Very true.
What sort of conditions do you have to deal with now? Are we giving clients full refunds? Are we keeping part of the cash? What are the legal implications of that?
This is usually hedged on the commercial agreements that the airlines have put out with the travel agents, and also the rules that they have put out on the tickets that you have purchased. However, what we have realized is that they have become very amiable and they are very understanding of the current situation. So they have provided a lot of flexibility by way of extending free cancellations and by way of extending full refunds, especially in areas that have already been categorized by WHO as high alert zones. Yes.
Right. So moving forward, though, and I know we don't like talking about worst case scenarios, but that's something we have to plan for.
True.
If we have to deal with something comparable to, say, what China had to deal with, right, in Wuhan, how will that affect the sector? Because I imagine, because as you said, it's unprecedented.
True.
A full lockdown in this market for, say, 12 weeks. How would your businesses fare?
In the period 2005 all the way to 2015, we actually went through something similar when the SARS and the Asian flu came in. And in the Middle East, we ended up experiencing the MERS. And during that period, what we realized was that the first 3 months, there was a very steep inclination, and then it peaked by the time we were getting onto the third month. And as we transitioned towards the fourth, fifth, and sixth month, the curve actually tapered down. And during that period, the bookings began to recover again.
Right, so you're looking essentially at a 6-month window
Correct.
to deal with this. So effectively, that would put you right back into peak season at the end of 2020.
At the end of 2020, yes.
But can travel agents, can business survive that 6-month window?
For us to survive for the next 6 or 12 months to come, we need to change our attitude and mindset around this issue, because this is another opportunity for us to actually transform and revive the sector and to look inwards. We have huge opportunities within the African continent because we are yet, to see many countries being flagged as high alert countries. So we do have an opportunity to promote travel intra-Africa, and I believe that will stimulate the travel industry and ensure that we continue to operate successfully.
All right, one last question for you. We do have a budget statement due in another 3 months, give or take, which is smack in the middle of that window that you gave us. What sort of support measures, tax and non-tax, would you like to see from the authorities moving forward, assuming that this does become a full-blown health crisis? I'm thinking of, say, for example, post-2008, right,
True.
after Kenya's post-election violence. And of course, some of your members may have some bank debt, they may have credit lines that they need to be able to service. Would you like, for example, those debts to be rescheduled?
The way we would look at it from an aviation perspective and also from a travel industry perspective, the biggest cost driver within our sector is actually the jet fuel. So the recommendations that we would wish to put forward to the government is for there to be a reevaluation on the jet fuel prices for the aircrafts, for the airlines that are operating into Kenya, Once we achieve a reduction on that, on those costs, then immediately what will happen is that the costs of the tickets will also go down.
So essentially stimulates the travel.
Essentially now you will have demand being stimulated, and you'll have a higher volume of passengers being able to undertake their travel. And the ripple effect of that is that, you know, all the travel agencies will definitely get onto a recovery mode. At the same time, in terms of financial stability, we would want to see better financial instruments in the travel industry by way of, you know, debts that are on a discounted interest rate being extended to the travel agents themselves, because at the end of the day, they need to also have a stronger financial standpoint as we try to build up the recovery of the sector.
All right, Agnes Moshoka, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for your time too.
Appreciate it. All right then, still on the business of COVID-19, Africa's biggest economy is under threat from the COVID-19 epidemic. China accounts for roughly a quarter, in some cases 30% of Nigeria's imports, and it supplies inputs for many logistics chains in the country. Oil and gas sales over there make up more than half of government revenues. But the price of oil, as we'll discuss later on in the bulletin, has fallen by almost 30% compared to the levels in January. Now, the possibility of this deadly virus spreading within Nigeria's borders is just adding to the pressure, as CGTN's Robert Nyang now explains.
Yetunde Oluyede is proud of her gift shop, which she's run in bustling Lagos for nearly a decade. But now, with Chinese supply chains broken by coronavirus closures, she's losing nearly $6,000 a month. Oluyede's reliance on China for Yeti Jewel Ventures is emblematic of the close ties between the world's second largest economy and Africa's most populous country.
For the past 2 months, we've not been able to ship in anything. A lot of our products are sold out. We need to restock because we have a high demand for it, but we can't do anything because the suppliers are not open, the warehouses are not open, the logistics company are not open for health and safety reasons, which we all understand. So we are in between selling what we have now, waiting for the virus to totally clear out so everybody gets to work.
The dampening news for Nigeria is that, as much as policymakers try to encourage the diversification of the economy, the country is still heavily reliant on oil export earnings. This means its fragile economic growth can be abruptly reversed if oil prices drop. And the outcome is now a very real possibility amid the COVID-19 epidemic.
You look at the Ray project, you look at the airport terminal, new airport terminal project, you look at the Mambila Plateau project, the power sector project. So it's just basically all our infrastructural projects will come to a standstill. And again, the monetary value of that cannot be quantified.
Nigeria confirmed its first COVID-19 case last week. Soon after that, local stock markets plunged, wiping some $980 million off its market cap. If the virus spreads and workers and shoppers stay home, much needed revenue from a higher VAT rate passed last year will evaporate. Economies across sub-Saharan Africa with just a handful of cases are all at risk. Countries such as Angola, which exports the bulk of its oil to China, and Kenya, which relies on China for billions in infrastructure funding, will also feel the heat. Robert Nyang, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
I'll run through some corporate headlines now. Barrick Gold is our starting point. It says it's increasing its inventory of key commodities to above normal levels. And that's because of the global spread of COVID-19. The world's second largest gold producer has put emergency medical procedures and facilities in place, and it's screening employees, contractors and visitors at each of its operational sites. Elsewhere, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey says he's reconsidering a proposed stint in Africa this year due to the, again, outbreak of COVID-19. The tweet has raised concerns among investors about how Dorsey would actually continue to run the San Francisco-based company and the mobile payments company Square, which he also leads, remotely. The Deputy Chief Executive of South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare says the drug maker sees no immediate impact of India's decision to restrict the export of 26 pharmaceutical ingredients due to the coronavirus outbreak. The drug maker said the virus had resulted in its Chinese commercial team being largely inactive since February, and this would impact the second half results of its 2020 financial year. And finally, Anglo-American Platinum shares fell by 20% on Friday after it declared force majeure and cut its 2020 production outlook. That was due to a temporary shutdown of its Anglo converter plant, otherwise known as ACP. The South African miner's ACP Phase A plant was damaged after an explosion inside the converter in February. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll take you on a somber visit to the crash site a year after the crash of Flight ET-302.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Time for a look now at Africa's super rich. In its latest edition of the Wealth Report, Knight Frank estimates that there are just over 4,500 Africans across the continent with a net worth of over $30 million. And of course, we're putting all the dollar billionaires into that category. Now, compare that to North America's figure of 249,000, Asia's 103,000, and Europe's figure of nearly 111,000. The firm, however, estimates that between 2019 and 2024, Africa will have the second highest growth of this category of individuals at 32%, beaten only by the Asian region. Now, Egypt and Tanzania are among the top 10 countries forecast to create persons with a net worth of at least $30 million in the next 5 years. In its latest assessment of the investment patterns of high net worth individuals, the agency estimates that the number of persons, of ultra high net worth persons rather, will rise by at least 2/3 in Egypt, 54% in Tanzania. The other African countries in its rankings include South Africa, Uganda, Zambia, Kenya, and Nigeria. But what exactly will drive the rise of more high net worth individuals in these countries, despite all the macroeconomic problems, which we've reported on here several times before? That's a question I put to Andrew Shirley. He's the editor of the 2020 Wealth Report.
Well, to start off, we're looking at a 5-year forecast, so we're not looking at anything too short term. So we're looking to the longer view, and we would anticipate that economies in these countries will be picking up where they've been sluggish of late. But I think you can't ignore that demographic picture. You can't ignore, the increase in the number of young people full of enthusiasm, full of entrepreneurship. So I think it's very easy to take a pessimistic view on Africa. But your middle class is forecast to rise massively. They're going to be increasingly big consumers of things that need to be created, of services, of goods. So I think the long-term picture, even if there are short-term issues, is still positive.
What about Egypt? Because it's one of the countries that you're forecasting to actually have the fastest growth. I think the only one that eclipses it is India. What is it about Egypt that makes it particularly prime for that sort of growth for high net worth persons?
Well, I think we have to look back a few years and we look at the failed Arab Spring. Everyone had these great hopes for Egypt when they had a new government and so forth, but it just didn't transpire. But now they seem to have got things more in order. So I think this very high level of growth is more of a reflection of this slow base that they're coming off, rather than the fact that their economy has been growing for a long period. It hasn't. So this is actually just Egypt playing catch-up.
Walk me through the typical portfolio that these high net worth individuals have, generally speaking, and I know I'm asking you to cover a lot of ground here, but generally speaking in Africa, vis-a-vis other parts of the world. Is it mostly the same generic mix that we see of property, equities and bonds, or is there something different from one country to the next in Africa?
There's a love of tangible assets in Africa, more so perhaps in other parts of the world, is why we see that property accounts for a much higher proportion of investment portfolios within Kenya. Stock markets are perhaps less mature here, so perhaps people feel less confident about putting so much of their money into a stock market. They're much happier to put it into their properties. But one of the interesting things about our attitude survey this year was that they revealed that in terms of ultra high net worth individuals, the wealth advisors who took the survey report that we have a much higher proportion of wealth being created by Gen Zers and millennials in Kenya compared with other parts of the world.
The asset classes that people are trying to invest in are somewhat different, it's especially on Gen Zs and millennials. More interest in private equity, more interest in venture capital. What are you seeing in those trends in Kenya?
I think it actually makes sense in Kenya where you look at where wealth is being created. It's being created in these new sectors, in fintech, in new ways to transfer your money, new ways to manage your money. So it seems understandable that this new generation of people who want to do things differently from their parents are taking advantage of that. I mean, we're in the sharing economy now. People don't value owning things like houses or record collections as much as their parents did. They want to invest money in more exciting things that have the potential, perhaps a little bit riskier, the potential for higher levels of growth.
What is it about these individuals that makes them averse to property? Is it just a generational attitude, an attitude change from one generation to the next, or is it that they're looking at the property assets available and they're saying, well, I can get better returns elsewhere, so why would I want to lock up my money in land or property?
I don't think it's that they're particularly averse to property, but one of the interesting people I interview in the report, a guy called Professor Andrew Scott, has written a book called The 100-Year Life, and it points out that people are living much longer. My kids in the UK will probably on average live to 100. So people have a lot longer to decide the course of their lives. So people don't need to lock up money in a property quite so quickly. They can look at different ways of wealth. They can make a few mistakes along the way. But I'm sure once they get older, once they have children, once they become older Generation Xers like me, that's when they'll start putting down more roots, and perhaps that's when they will start investing in property. So I'm not worried that Knight Frank is not going to have anybody buying property in the future. It's just people are taking longer to make up their minds where they want to put down their roots.
Now, Tuesday, March 10th will mark a year since the fatal crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. That killed all 157 passengers and crew on board that Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. The crash site, which is now surrounded by an unfinished wooden fence, sees little activity often, besides a visit from mourners bearing flowers. CGTN's Terry Wangari filed this report.
It's been a year since the Ethiopian plane crashed. The crash site has been converted to a mourning ground for the victims' families. Flight 302 victims are also honored privately, even by people who had no direct connection to the tragedy.
We remember them from the moment our plane takes off until about 6 minutes when it crashed. We quietly try to imagine what they went through, especially during the 4 minutes after the MCAS system deployed. How harrowingly difficult it must have been for those inside the plane.
We used to bring kolo and injera and share to eat with the victim's family and with those who came from government.
As recently as January, Ethiopian Airlines hoped to use the anniversary to announce the winner of an architectural design competition for a memorial. But that plan now appears to be on hold after the document drew pushback from some victims' families who objected to what they perceived as a rushed timeline.
We have been told that the government is either going to build a monument or hospital or school.
The monument could feature contemplation areas and a visitors center, while suggested elements of the park included footpaths and trees. After reviewing bids, judges were to make a decision by March the 7th, with a public exhibition for the winner to begin on March 10th, which is the one-year anniversary. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Now, we won't be on air then, but Sunday, the 8th of March, is International Women's Day. It's themed as an equal world is an enabled world. Among the issues in focus will be equality in business and wealth. So what gains have women made, and what are the challenges they face, especially as far as access to finance is concerned? Let's examine this in a bit more detail. Nishdeep Sethi is the head of structured finance at the African Guarantee Fund. She's with me in studio right now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Rama.
It's 2020. A lot of economies across this continent have been free and independent for a while. Why is it that we're still talking about barriers to access to finance for women, for basically half the population in 2020?
So, I mean, we must acknowledge that, you know, there have been major strides that have been made in closing the financial gap, just in general. But still, we see that women are lagging in this development. And this is mainly due to three broad issues under which many other challenges fall. The main one being financial gaps, the financial challenge, where we see that banking women is perceived to be riskier. And therefore, we find that financial institutions and banks tend to steer away from lending to that segment and taking on that additional risk.
Because that tends to be more often than not, I guess, a culture thing. Because if you've got, for lack of a better word, mostly male-dominated boards, male-dominated management, they will make these decisions based on biases, but not necessarily based on data.
Right.
And that's essentially how we end up with that problem.
Exactly. And you see, that's the thing, that a lot of these financial institutions, they aren't banking to women, and the risk is perceived. And we feel that if they went ahead and actually took on this banking and provided services to this segment and recorded this data, they would actually see that this risk is not as high and imminent as they believe it to be.
Right. The other thing I think you alluded to a little earlier was the question of the market structure,
yes.
right? Because on one hand, you look at the labor market data that we
yes.
get in Kenya, and it's a near 50-50 split, right,
yes.
as far as labor force composition is concerned, roughly half men and women.
Yes.
But you then look at access to finance, and it's a completely different picture. Yeah. So how do we square that circle? What explains that difference?
So, as I said, the first is obviously the financial institutions that don't want to take on additional risk. But
yeah.
there's also the side of these women and these women entrepreneurs that also believe that banking for them is difficult, it's a challenge. And they tend to play more in the informal sector, and that's where they tend to be more prominent, and hence the reason for the gap. And we find that a lot of this lies with capacity issue, where a lot of the women entrepreneurs and women businesses have already been excluded from the financial sector
yeah.
because of this perceived risks. And they tend to then just move away from it. So there's this gap that needs to sort of be bridged between the female entrepreneurs and the female businesses and the financial institutions that are able to provide the banking services to them.
Right. Just one last question for you very, very quickly.
Sure.
Is it possible to essentially just take some of that risk off the table with banks? Because that's
yes.
essentially what you guys do.
Exactly, right. So we at AGF, we act as catalysts for this kind of banking for this kind of segment, where we come in and we de-risk the bank's portfolio. We share the risk with them through our risk-sharing instruments, through guarantee activities. We also provide capacity development to these women entrepreneurs to ensure that they're credit ready for the financial, for the banks really, and really to bridge the gap between the banks and between the women entrepreneurs and the women businesses.
All right,
Yeah.
Nishdeep Sethi, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Great.
Appreciate it. All right then, you're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We're still focusing on the coronavirus to look at how China, where it started, is managing to contain it. And Japan, the land of really long working hours, is now warming up to the idea of a 4-day work week. What changed? We'll explore that next.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's recap the headlines at this hour. The number of confirmed cases of the coronavirus in Africa has risen to 42 after Togo announced its first confirmed case. Early on Friday, Cameroon also reported 2 cases. Egypt has recorded 12 more cases. That raises the number in the country to 14. Algeria, however, does remain the worst affected African nation, 17 cases of COVID-19 in the North African state. Elsewhere, the Interior Ministry in Tunisia has confirmed that a policeman has died from fatal injuries in Friday's suicide blast within the vicinity of the American embassy in Tunis. 2 terrorists targeted a police checkpoint in the safe area around the embassy. And finally, in Côte d'Ivoire, President Alassane Ouattara says he will not be seeking another term in the upcoming October elections. Local leaders on all sides have welcomed his announcement. This essentially ends speculation about Mr. Ouattara's political future after he previously showed an interest in seeking a 3rd term. That's a run through your headlines. Further afield, China is employing what some are describing as a whole-of-society approach in restarting business operations. The country's Commerce Ministry says the coronavirus outbreak has not triggered major shifts yet in supply chains out of the world's 2nd biggest economy. Here's CGTN's Michael Wang.
As China employs every ounce of energy to battle the coronavirus, there have been calls outside the country once again for businesses to decouple from China or reduce supply chain ties. These calls are not helpful. The coronavirus has indeed sent a shiver into the hubs and nodes connecting China's vast supply chain network. It is the only country in the world to have every single industrial category in the United Nations Industrial Classification System. So, when China's manufacturing sneezes, global value chains shake. But I believe because China is now so intertwined in global value chains that the country understands its deep responsibility to ensure supply chain stability. Doing so is in the vital interests of both the Chinese and world economies. China's policymakers are prioritizing resuming production at companies that are key links in global value chains. There's a focus through targeted policies on kickstarting what's called leading enterprises. where resuming work at these companies will lead to the resumption of production all along the supply chain. We see this across the country already. Among the many examples, gears are up and running again at leading enterprises such as Ford's joint venture in China's southwest megacity of Chongqing. BMW's production plant is back in action in the northeastern industrial hub of Shenyang. The automaker's €3 billion investment in a new factory is going ahead as planned. Production is ramping up at global laptop-making giant Wistron's plant in Jiangsu province. Officials there mapped out detailed supply chains to assist Wistron in receiving the critical components it needed from its suppliers. Yes, the virus has disrupted supply chains in the short term, but it hasn't changed the long-term attractiveness of the Chinese market. It also doesn't change the long-term competitiveness of Chinese supply chains either. Manufacturing in China means access to distinct industrial clusters that are hard to find anywhere else in the world. Now, clustering translates not just into single factory efficiency, but significant efficiency gains for an entire industry. These manufacturing clusters are also supported, of course, by an advanced logistics network and high-skilled talent. BCG, for example, says that manufacturing in China remains cost competitive in a wide range of industries. The consulting firm cites higher productivity growth, investments in state-of-the-art technology, declining industrial energy costs, and new production capacities in China's interior. Overall, the highly integrated value chains of China make them very difficult to replace. The coronavirus will not change the structural advantages of this exceptionally competitive network or the enormous market these supply chains serve. The virus did land a blow to global value chains, but China, through its unified, coordinated, and targeted approach, will deliver that knockout punch.
Now, as an island province off the southern coast of the Chinese mainland, Hainan wasn't hit as hard by the COVID-19 outbreak as other parts of China were. Nonetheless, the outbreak still did lead to work closures and production stoppages for quite a few companies there. CGTN's Sun Ye now examines how businesses on the island were affected and how operations are coming back to life.
Construction of Hainan ethylene refinement plant resumed a month ago amid the novel coronavirus epidemic. The plant, when becoming operational, will be able to produce 1 million tons of ethylene a year and is expected to greatly pump up industries down the supply chain. The COVID-19 outbreak did, however, slow down the progress, and now workers are trying to make up for the time lost.
Now, 90% of the machines are back in operation. We had planned to finish this project by March 30th, but due to the impact of the epidemic, it will be delayed until the end of April. In order to ensure our progress, we are working overtime. We plan to catch up with the construction schedule by April 20th.
In another town in Hainan province, chemical plants are producing raw material for medical protection gear such as masks and protective clothing. The plant rolled out 1,500 tons in February, and capacity is expected to reach 3,500 tons later this month. The products are being shipped to other provinces in China by container ships.
In terms of shipping routes, we have reached pre-spring festival levels. In terms of foreign trade, all 7 overseas routes have been resumed. So far, 50 voyages have started. By the end of February, 20,000 containers had been delivered to foreign countries.
Just 2 days ago, the Morning Laura, a cargo ship carrying 430 imported cars from Qatar, arrived in Haikou. It's the first ship carrying imported automobile since the implementation of the free trade zone policy in Hainan.
The cost of operating and logistics, even the whole cost, will decrease, and it will make a great contribution to Hainan's economy. Sinotrans, as an operator in the whole process of the logistics supply chain, has done some examinations and made approval upon Morning Laura's arrival.
By the end of February, Hainan had restarted 674 projects under construction. All 20 key foreign trade enterprises and 16 aquatic processing and export enterprises had also resumed work, getting the island back on track quickly. Sun Ye, CGTN.
The coronavirus outbreak, as you've heard for most of this hour really, has disrupted life across the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has banned pilgrimages to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, while Iran has cancelled Friday prayers in major cities. But one event that is going ahead without interruption is the Dubai Comic-Con.
Many visitors to this event in Dubai are wearing face masks, but they're not regular hygiene masks. Instead, they're skeletons, monsters, and more. Here, everyone is having a good time. The 3-day Middle East Film and Comic-Con event in Dubai gives anime, movie, and comic buffs a chance to dress up and even dance. But with the coronavirus outbreak in the region, visitors are taking precautions. Mohammed Rashid is wearing 2 gloves underneath his Luigi costume, the famous sidekick to the video game character Mario.
I was worried, especially since my mother repeatedly told me, don't go, don't go, don't go, please don't go. And if you will go, at the very least, take precaution, which is why I'm wearing 2 layers of gloves, as you can see. But of course, it is something I wouldn't say I'm very panicky about, but it's something I think we should be precautious about. So even if we do want to have fun, we still should take some extra steps.
Abdullah and his friends are dressed as sharks.
Despite the virus and all that, we came because we still love this place and we cherish it, and we know that people, if they love this place and they would love the people there, they would not harm each other. So they would make a previous, like maybe checkups or something, so they can avoid that situation happening. Also for us, we came with certain precautions when we came here. We made sure, you know, we're not going, like, yeah, we got sanitizers. We don't have a lot of contact towards a lot of people, just in case.
The United Arab Emirates has at least 28 confirmed cases of the virus, a small number compared to the more than 3,700 cases across the region. But concern here is growing. Antibacterial pumps are stationed throughout the event, and organizers are giving out masks to attendees.
I always wear a mask because I would prefer to have my identity as a secret. Coronavirus does not make me scared. That's why I came here to Comic-Con, because I know and I believe that this event is ready and prepared for this issue.
And I think it's the only event that managed to survive the whole government, them trying to block everything. So all events were canceled or postponed, but Comic-Con really managed to put it on. Trust me, we're all thankful for it.
Despite growing fears and extra precautions, these comic fans won't let the virus get in their way of fun. Lin, CGTN.
Bit of positivity there from Dubai. Now, once synonymous with long working hours, companies in Japan now are starting to at least consider the idea of a 4-day work week. The concept is nothing new, but it's gaining increasing acceptance over there. The government has made work style reform a key priority in the hope of giving employees more flexibility as the country's population ages and the available workforce continues to shrink. From Tokyo, here's CGTN's Steve Ross on what's hot tonight.
One choice that could be in Japan's future is the 4-day work week. Shingo Ohata with work-style consulting firm Work-Life Balance says his company has already made the change.
We have been testing this for a year now. The system is not only about working 4 days a week, but workers can also have more flexibility and choose their work hours during the year.
The reasons for a shortened work week tend to fall into patterns, including caring for children or elderly relatives, or pursuit of personal projects, such as Ohata's own Tokyo Olympics volunteer venture. But the additional free time can also benefit employers.
One more pattern is your own input, the input for innovation, as we call it. This time, it can be used for study to acquire new skills.
But Ohata says in a Japanese work culture frequently described as hidebound, shifting workplace preconceptions may be the greatest hurdle.
Based on previous success, we think that increasing sales requires longer hours, but we need to adapt a new style of reduced working time.
While Japan's forward-looking business leaders advocate work styles adapted to modern lifestyles, the success of the 4-day work week or any other new labor approach will likely depend most on the workers themselves.
A quick sampling of opinions from some of Tokyo's workforce indicates that while they're ready for more free time, they have doubts about when or if a 4-day work week can happen in Japan. Steve Ross, CGTN, Tokyo.
Now, we've had robots in factories for decades, but getting them to leave the shop floor is not exactly easy. In manufacturing plants, they carry out very preordained, specific, repetitive tasks day and night. And for that narrow, defined range of tasks, they do pretty well. But step outside those parameters and they really can't deal with the chaos of the real world. CGTN's Mark New now takes us to an event where futurists are bringing robots out of their comfort zone and into our, frankly, very messy little planet.
At the TechCrunch Robotics plus AI conference at the University of California, Berkeley, a cooking robot called Nimble whips up mushroom rotini. The meal is then packed into an autonomous delivery robot where it heads to its destination. Delivery robots also cross paths with Burrow, which is actually a self-driving robot with the primary purpose of following workers as they harvest crops. These Stanford University students build quadrupeds like Doggo, which can jump a meter high and do back handsprings. They built their latest robot, Stanford Pupper, for just $600.
This is Spot from Boston Dynamics, the robot dog, which is already on the market. It's one of the main influences for the various Stanford robots. They've all come together. Now, what happens when these robots become smarter and smarter?
I personally hope that, number one, it can be an educational tool, and it provides a platform for kids to write their own software. So what that could mean is writing some type of artificial intelligence on top of the robot so it could track, maybe follow you around, recognize, certain objects. My hope is that people take it in their own directions.
But the direction AI is currently taking is under the microscope by some experts.
I think a lot of people assume that, you make AI better, you win. No, you make AI better, you lose.
University of California, Berkeley professor Stuart Russell is the author of the book Human Compatible: Artificial Intelligence and the Problem of Control. He gives an example. What if an AI robot is only designed to serve me coffee?
If that's your only objective in life, is to make sure that Mark gets a cup of coffee, right? Well, one of the things that would occur to you is, if someone switches me off, I'm not going to be able to deliver the coffee to Mark. That would be a tragedy. So I have to take every possible precaution to make sure that there are no human beings who could switch me off.
Russell believes computer scientists need to make sure AI algorithms defer to human permission from the very start. He says AI will create a host of other issues for people.
Employment is one. What will humans do? How will we maintain the incentive to learn ourselves, to train, to acquire skills, knowledge, capabilities, when we can just have machines do it for us?
Spending on AI systems is expected to triple to nearly $100 billion in 2023, meaning everything around us will quickly be getting smarter, for better or for worse. Mark New, CGTN, Berkeley, California.
All right, then a quick run through some commodity prices here for you. So Brent crude falling particularly hard today ahead of the outcomes of the OPEC Plus meeting in Vienna, going as low as 46.08 in today's session, down about 8%. WTI also following suit, down 8.3% to just over $42 a barrel. That's the biggest one-day plunge we've seen really since 2015, and it's now 28.8% in the red at these levels, at least on WTI it is. The OPEC meeting in Vienna essentially ended without Russia agreeing to take part in OPEC's proposed cut of 1.5 million barrels a day. Where oil prices go from here is anyone's guess. Here's what's coming up next. We'll introduce you to a business in Nigeria that's taking virtual reality tech into the classroom.
Don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, virtual reality has for a really long time been viewed from that very narrow prism of entertainment and video games, but it's fast expanding beyond that into education and the workplace. In Lagos, a tech startup known as Emisi 3D is taking virtual reality to the classroom as part of its efforts to improve the quality of education in a country that's home to nearly 200 million people. Here's CGTN's Deji Banos with that story on Grassroots.
Emisi 3D is an extended reality creation lab based in a suburb of Lagos, locally regarded as the city's Silicon Valley. Founded by Judith Okonkwo in 2016, the tech startup broadens access to the XR technology by growing a community of content creators and educating people about it through a touch and feel approach. Emisi 3D's solution is particularly focused on working in specific important sectors such as education. The whole idea is to provide innovative education content through virtual reality, which will improve experiential learning for students with limited access to study aids.
If you go to a local public school, you'll easily have 80, 90 children in one classroom. They might not have laboratories, for example, for the sciences. It certainly means that they will not be able to afford going to field trips, in different parts of the country or the world. However, with a technology like virtual reality, you can set up a VR lab in the school. So you can have students do experiments in a virtual lab. You can have them do things like explore the pyramids of Egypt, or see the Eiffel Tower, all in VR.
With a computer, VR headset, and camera, the VR experience creates a supplement to classroom teaching. The tech company has been working closely with a local secondary school in Lagos to get schools and students embrace the technology.
They can explore the solar system, so it's not just this abstract concept they're hearing about, but they can actually see the planets and manipulate them. They can be in the human body and move the human heart, things like that.
Already, the tech startup has been able to create custom content for the Nigerian junior secondary school curriculum in 3 subjects, courtesy of support from the UNICEF Innovation Fund. Over the past year, Okonkwo and her team have been able to record tremendous successes with the technologies, particularly in the area of storytelling.
In the Forbes list of the best XR experiences of 2019, there were 2 Nigerian VR film projects, one of which was produced here. So we're seeing significant wins with the little that we've been able to do. I think we expect to see a lot more. If we get the uptake that we should have, if we have the right content, it will literally change education as we know it.
In most cases, the company has to provide required facilities for students by themselves, and this is one area that Okonkwo wants policy drivers to pay attention to.
One thing that has been obvious for the last few years is that, the XR technologies are severely under-resourced in Africa. In setting up a space that we would use as a lab, we had to provide alternate power supply. We certainly had to make sure that there were places where we could have access to things like the internet for the headsets to update them when we needed to. And for us, that typically means bringing them back to the lab here to get that done.
The XR technology holds a lot of potential for education in Nigeria. For this reason, Emisi 3D also invests in building local content creators through scholarship offers and support for enthusiasts who are looking to start a career in augmented and virtual reality or the emerging technologies. But it will need a lot of push to make VR a common reality in every classroom in the country. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And finally, video games are much more than just about slick, refined gameplay mechanics. Well, most of the time they're not, unless it's the competitive world of first-person shooters or competitive real-time tactics. Titles like Dota 2, League of Legends, StarCraft, you name it. But beyond all of that, deep immersion into a well-written, well-presented plot is still king. Let's take a look now at Salam. It's a peace-building game that's not just about educating players, it's also impacting refugees in the real world.
Lual Mayen is not your typical game developer. The South Sudanese refugee was born 25 years ago as his family traveled 250 miles to escape the country's second civil war. Growing up, he never even saw a computer until one day when he reported to the camp's registration center.
It was a refugee registration time where they were registering refugees, and they brought people from developed countries to come and enter their data on the computers. And I went to the registration center and I saw a computer, and I was like, "What is that?" I told my mother, "What is that?" And she was like, "That's a computer." And I was like, "How did you even know it's a computer?" Right? And from there, it's a moment that actually helped me to understand, wow, I want to use this one day. I don't know what it's going to take me, but I want to use something like that.
For the next 3 years, his mother worked tirelessly to stash away $300 to buy him a laptop, which he now keeps in a glass display case in his apartment. The first game he discovered was Grand Theft Auto. Hainan was drawn to the game, which is famously violent. He started to wonder what if, instead of a game that encourages players to take violent actions, he could make the same thing happen, but for peace and conflict resolution. And that's when Salam, his latest game, was born.
I realized the power of game during that moment, because it was like a violent game. You kill people, and to me, as someone who came from a war country, I felt actually what was actually happening in the game was what is happening in my country. And to me, I took it as a responsibility, because South Sudan is a country that has over 73% of the population is under the age of 30. These are all young people. They were born in war, they were raised up in war. And to me, it's like, if they start playing games like this, they will feel like that's how things are done, something like that.
In the game, players take on the identity of a refugee escaping a conflict zone. They have to gather resources like food and medicine while running to stay alive.
As a refugee myself, and growing up in a refugee camp, I understand that a lot of people don't understand the journey of a refugee. They really don't know what it has taken somebody to become a refugee. So we are using gamification and game to be able to help people in the world understand what their journey is.
Hainan has also garnered international recognition from Facebook and the global gaming community. Most notably, more than 26 million people watched via livestream as he was named a global gaming citizen at the 2018 Game Awards.
And to be able to see something I started in a refugee camp ending up as an African independent game designer, to be able to represent the continent and represent the game for such an impact, it gave me so much hope, and it gave more refugees hope.
For Hainan now, the focus is to bring Salam to a larger audience. His vision is to use the game to inspire empathy for refugees. He's working on a charitable component so that when players make in-app purchases of extra resources, a portion would go to a grassroots organization at a refugee camp. His goal here is, as people pay to stay alive a little longer in the game, they will be supporting the lives of actual refugees. Wilkes Anyabo, CGTN.
All right, then let's wrap up the program with a run through the currencies here for you. So starting with the Kenyan shilling, it's essentially 1.5% weaker so far in the year. And the latest bout of weakness has simply come from the central bank announcing that it's going to be buying about $100 million every month from the market between March and June. The rand still essentially weaker. In fact, it's the worst performing of the currencies that we do track here, down about 11% against American dollars so far in the year. The Egyptian pound still continuing on its gaining streak against American dollar, up nearly 3% so far in the year. But the naira is the one that we're really focusing on as oil prices continue to fall. For how much longer can the CBN continue to defend that position for the naira? We'll find out and update you. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour or so. There's several ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Rama Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.